Here's a radio that conclusively proves it takes more than just throwing in a bunch of fancy features to produce a product with good quality and high performance. This is the RadioShack model number 12-888, digitally tuned AM, FM, and weather band portable radio with stereo audio reception and playback capability for FM programming. And indeed, it does have a fair few interesting features to offer. Unfortunately, its performance is also lacking, as we'll see in just a moment. But first, let's begin our tour with the controls on the top of the radio. At the extreme left of the radio, there is a band switching button that allows you to choose between the previously mentioned AM, FM, and weather bands. Right above that is a telescoping whip antenna that can also be rotated around freely as needed to maintain the best possible reception of an FM or weather band radio station. AM stations are received by the very common ferrite or iron loop stick within the radio itself. Thus, to adjust the reception of an AM station, you would actually turn the radio itself rather than utilizing the whip antenna. This whip antenna has definitely endured an indignity at some point in its life. We actually found this radio when we were cleaning out the keykeeper's old bedroom in preparation to turn it into an office and work area for my father. Right next to the band switch button, we have a total of 5 station presets. This radio actually makes available a total of 10 presets, and I believe that they are available for each band of reception that it supports. Unfortunately, they are a bit convoluted to program, especially if you're trying to program presets 6 through 10 with your favorite stations. And speaking of presetting stations, right next to the station memory presets is, of course, a button that is used to establish the presets. There's also a button that allows you to choose between the radio and clock display, which is something that a fair number of portable, digitally tuned radios with clocks in my personal collection do not actually offer, which makes it a little bit inconvenient to find out what time it is when you're listening to the radio. There are a few sets in my collection where you simply have no choice but to turn the set off in order to see the time of day, or to do something like setting the clock, which leaves you open to the possibility of messing up the current time setting, and if you don't have any other clocks nearby, being unable to reset it for a period of time, at least until such time as you can get to another clock. Finally, wrapping up the controls on the top is a dynamic bass button that, as we'll soon see, does not actually do very much. Here on the front of the radio, it has an uncluttered, very simple visual design. You have the RadioShack logo at the top, a spacious display window with a very nice and surprisingly even blue backlight that's very easy to read. This knob right next to the display allows you to both tune radio stations manually and to engage the automatic seek tuning feature that this radio has. So this would be a very good set to have if you ever find yourself in an area where you're unsure of what radio stations are on the dial and you simply want to do a band scan to see what you can tune in. And of course there is the speaker grill down here. And finally, the designation at the bottom telling us that this is, again, a digitally tuned AM, FM, and weather band radio with stereo audio playback capability. On the side, we have the volume and power control up top. Right below that, there is a stereo headphone jack. And then on the back, you have the battery compartment, complete with a built-in power cord that you cannot lose. This radio supports both 4 C-cell batteries, as well as the previously mentioned AC line cord as power sources when you're listening to it. Somewhat surprisingly, although I could see someone using this as a bedside radio, it does not actually have any alarm clock functionality. So let's go ahead and extend the whip antenna. And while I expect that reception down here in the basement with all these sources of computer-generated RF hash around won't be all that great, perhaps we can actually hear something and bring to light this radio's greatest shortcoming, which is, unfortunately, that of audio quality. When I turn the radio on, you will probably also be able to hear another deficiency in that there is a very noticeable whine produced somewhere within the radio's electronics at all times. At first I thought this might have something to do with the display backlight driver circuitry, but it's present anytime that the radio is turned on, and it's most prevalent on the FM band. So something is definitely producing interference. You may be able to hear that whine very, very faintly. As you can probably hear, if you can hear it at all, it's independent of the setting of the volume control. And speaking of the volume control, because you are actually telling a microprocessor within this radio what you want it to do, response to the controls is actually surprisingly slow. But every time you operate one of the controls on this radio, it does bring to life the backlight, and it turns on some additional indicators within the display. I'm surprised that some of these indications do not stay on at all times. For example, the radio station memories, the FM indication, and I believe that the stereo indicator also goes away after a short period of time, leaving you only the volume indication and the current time. But of course you can bring back all the other indicators at any time you'd like by simply pushing the radio and clock button. But right away, as I'm sure you probably heard, the audio from this radio is very, very tinny and lackluster. It certainly looks, based on the design, like there would have been room for much better speakers in here, but whoever designed and manufactured this for RadioShack unfortunately did not use any. So while you can receive radio programming on the FM band in stereo with this set, it just doesn't sound very good, and the dynamic bass button doesn't do anything to help. I can't detect any change at all, to be honest. In fact, let's get another radio down from my shelf. This is a much simpler set that I talked about in a previous video. It's actually a radio from my childhood. It's very nicely designed, 1980s Panasonic model. And in addition to its having far better audio quality than the RadioShack set, I think you'll also notice that the performance of its FM tuner is far superior. Yes, it's certainly able to stand up and deliver with a great deal more fidelity in its audio output, and just a great deal more volume and clarity and pretty much everything else that the little RadioShack doesn't have. Of course, we haven't listened to any really contemporary music yet, so let's see if we can find some on the FM dial when we start a band scan. We'll let the radio do its own seek tuning. You probably noticed that there for a moment it did indicate that it could tune as far as 108.1 megahertz, which is definitely more coverage than most digitally tuned radios manage. Here's some R&B music. If there's a lot of bass in anything, I would expect it to be there. So we'll turn on dynamic bass. Let's see what we get. And the answer, of course, is nothing all that great. We'll just continue on down the dial. We mustn't stop at any one station for too long, because I'd rather not have a copyright strike as a result of this video.
Just a parking lot down. It looks like freedom to the
There you can actually hear some of the stereo separation. It does actually manage to have a surprisingly decent amount.
Like right now. Thanks for...
Alright, let's go ahead and try out the AM band. Unfortunately, there will be a lot of noise and hash on this. The seek tuning is implemented in such a way that makes it impossible to simply get to the bottom or top of the desired tuning band by holding down the tuning dial. which I certainly consider to be a setback. The AM tuning ranges from 530 kilohertz all the way up to 1,710 kilohertz. I don't expect we'll find anything on the dial but hash and noise, but let's go ahead and give it a try anyway. They don't make any mention of it in the manual, but I've kind of noticed just now, tuning amongst AM stations, although unfortunately I don't have access to any that would be broadcasting in Sequam analog AM stereo, that there is almost a phase shifting effect between the two speakers that makes me wonder if this set might not have some undocumented capability in that area. And I apologize for the stupid dog yapping in the background. Listen carefully to what happens. The audio changes noticeably when it zeroes in on an AM station. Well, it didn't then. Perhaps that phase shifting effect I noticed is just a byproduct of the automated tuning. Also takes it a while to unmute the audio. And now we're just getting to the point where every station that it's finding is simply a result of computer-generated electronic hash noise. So let's try switching over to the weather band and see if against all odds we can actually pick up a weather radio signal down here. Unfortunately, it seems that we cannot do so at this time. But as I'm sure you noticed, this radio's audio performance really isn't the greatest. I have far cheaper radios than this one that will again utterly outclass its performance in the audio department. Somewhere down here there is a very old General Electric portable radio that is by no stretch of the imagination a high fidelity offering, and even it, in my opinion, manages to sound better than this RadioShack set does. There's another odd problem with this set. Something about the plastics, particularly the blue-colored portions, have begun to degrade, and they're sticky. I don't know how I could prove this, unless maybe I could get something that was made of paper, like, say, this tag off of a Napa product. It'll actually stick. This is a problem that's also been seen on certain IBM ThinkPad portable computer plastics, and I'm guessing that the breakdown is the same here. You can see there's a bunch of lint and hair and stuff stuck to the bottom of this radio. The cure that's usually performed for the ThinkPads, and it might work for this, involves the use of either talcum or cornstarch based baby powder. And I might just try powdering this radio, although I'd want to make sure that I did that when nobody was around, because I'd really not relish the notion of explaining what it is I'm doing, powdering a radio in the bathroom. So that's a tour of the RadioShack 12-888 model, digitally tuned AM/FM weather portable radio with stereo audio capability. Thank you as always for watching. I certainly hope you enjoyed the video, and as always I'm interested in hearing your constructive comments and questions.